Okay, welcome to our session on gastronomy. Gastronomy sounds like something a little bit off topic for this conference, but I think that it's really important to discuss this because, as you know, Japan has become a top tourist destination over the last, maybe decade or so. And one of the main key attractions that tourists come to Japan for is food. Food in the sense of gastronomy is important because the way most of the international visitors get access to Japanese food is through restaurants. And they visit, more, of course, casual eateries, but also high-end places that involve not just tastiness, but also history, culture, and tradition. That's why we are talking about gastronomy in this session. Before going into further details, I'd like to take a step back and put things in perspective. The Japanese people, most Japanese people think that the Japanese gastronomy scene, the culinary scene is great, but how is it great? And is it really great? I'd like to put things in a global comparative perspective. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of Japan as a culinary destination? I'd like to especially get inputs from a few international experts we have, Chef Daniel Calvert, and also our journalist Melinda Zhou. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that if we compare Japan as a culinary destination to other areas of the world, I think that one of the strengths is that it has its own unique identity. And of course, so does France, so does Spain. Where I'm from in England, we don't actually have that kind of identity. So I think that when people are coming to Japan, they are specifically coming to eat Japanese cuisine, whether it be sushi, kaiseki, or vis-a-vis. But I think that that is one of the strengths that you have this identity that people immediately, when they come to Japan, they know exactly what they want to eat.
I think that, of course, unique cultural identity is a strength, but also the high standard of quality. Japan, and when it comes to food, Japanese culture is a culture of connoisseurship. And so Japanese consumers really understand quality and they're willing to pay for quality. And increasingly, a lot of international visitors feel the same way.
How about from a restaurant business perspective? What are the strengths of Japanese restaurants vis-a-vis those in other countries?
Well, the specialization that Daniel mentioned, I mean, I think that's something that's very unique. You have so many restaurants that are focused on getting one dish or one style of food just absolutely pitch perfect. And I think this is really great. This is something that even consumers can, that it makes it actually easy for consumers in a way, because if they know, like what you said, that they want to have sushi or that they want to have yakitori, then they know where to search and which restaurants to go to.
Of course, and I think aside from the cuisine and the wine, I think there's a certain hospitality that exists in a Japanese restaurant that doesn't necessarily exist in other styles of restaurants. So I think while people, of course, crave the cuisine and the wine and the region they're going to, they actually crave the service and the hospitality just as much.
Right. And that's going to be an increasingly important point going forward, because we are entering an age where the market is so competitive with restaurants, because we have such good quality and such high standards already, and we have more people entering the field. So if you're going to, for example, have a restaurant in Tokyo, you need to have already amazing food. That's just the standard. That's just the point of entry at this point. So what is going to really differentiate your restaurant or your establishment from your competitors? And that point, I think, is hospitality.
Right. Thank you. To play the devil's advocate, what are the things that are not great about Japanese culinary scene?
I think accessibility is a big issue for many people coming into the country to try to eat at these restaurants that, of course, regionally are so celebrated that would actually bring people to regions or cities or wherever. But when you get there, actually getting into these places can be quite a challenge.
Right. In terms of the limited seating capacity for a lot of restaurants, the difficulty of securing reservations, the fact that a lot of restaurants still don't have a digital platform or any kind of digital presence to deal with some of these overseas queries or non-Japanese speaking guests. That's one issue. But another thing that I think just from in terms of like the kinds of restaurants that we have, what is really great about Tokyo, for example, is that there's a lot of diversity. You have very traditional restaurants side by side with very contemporary restaurants. But one thing that I feel is, and you guys, like, I would love to hear if you have different opinions, but one thing that I feel is lacking a little bit is really contemporary creative Japanese cuisine. Like we see a lot of younger chefs that are making more creative cuisine, but like really based in sort of a Western European tradition. And I would really like to see more experimentation in the genre of Japanese cuisine and see where that goes.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's kind of the reason why I think that this restaurant called Den in Shibuya, the Jingumae, is #1 on Asia's 50 best restaurants in 2022. Den offers a rare mix of traditional Japanese cooking with innovation. And also it's a playful restaurant where you enjoy the experience, not just the food, but the presentation, etc., which is something you don't typically find in Japanese restaurants. As Melinda said, I think the Japanese restaurants are good at perfecting one thing with the already defined recipe, and which is something I see in Japan as well as in China. So these are artisans. They do the same thing over and over again to perfect one thing. And people, are not really receptive to, innovations.
But I guess that also comes from the guest perspective too. I guess you go to these restaurants and you know exactly what you want to have. And if it deviates from that ever so slightly, I think that there is an expectation when you go to a high-end sushi, you're going to have X, Y, and Z. And I think if someone started playing around with that protocol, I think as a guest, especially had you waited maybe, I don't know, 6 months to get in, I think that there is an expectation of what you are going to eat, which kind of hinders creativity a little bit.
That's a good point. But also I think for a lot of businesses in Japan, there is a high sense of risk aversion. So that kind of hinders creativity and experimentation a lot. I'm not sure why that is true, but I definitely get that sense that a lot of businesses are very averse to risk.
That's right. Thank you. Well, to change the subject a little bit, I'd like to, the Japanese restaurants have, attained global fame. Restaurants like Den has become the #1 in Asia. These restaurants are doing very well, and many foodies around the world come to Japan to eat at these restaurants. But these are, the results of the efforts, intentional efforts made by the chefs and the restaurants, people who work at the restaurants themselves, and not really something that was initiated by the government. But I see in the world that there are many governments that have intentionally and strategically used, the food or the gastronomy as a weapon to enhance their national brand. Can you touch upon that, please?
Yeah, I think the first one that comes to our minds particularly would be, say, Peru or Latin America, because I think, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was not such a movement out of this country. And now we have household names, someone like Virgilio Martinez, for example, who's globally recognized as one of the best Peruvian chefs. And of course, now has a restaurant here in Tokyo. But I think that a lot of that support was from a government standpoint. Of course, they did a great job together. But I think that without that support, perhaps other restaurants in the area wouldn't have opened up so quickly, and they wouldn't have developed such a high-end scene so fast.
Yes, absolutely. The government was instrumental in recognizing gastronomy as a tool to increase their national brand, and that practice is called gastro diplomacy. They were very much a pioneer in that space. But another example would be Scandinavia, very successful. If you look at a city like Copenhagen, 20 years ago, Copenhagen would never have been considered a destination for dining. But now dining is one of the main draws for Copenhagen. And there's a very much flourishing scene of restaurants and shops and, beer, wine
Breweries,
produced.
yeah.
Exactly. So many places. And that was, like with Peru, a joint effort between the private sector and government. And another thing that both of these countries did very well was that their strategy was not only outward facing to attract tourists, it was also to encourage trade. So one thing that both countries did was try to seek out products like agricultural products and promote local producers and local talent, making these products available to people not only overseas, but within the country. And also elevating the level of talent with education. For example, in Peru, like the very big culinary school program that they initiated, that Gaston Curio initiated, was instrumental in creating a bigger, better gastronomy scene.
To be honest, I can't think of another industry, within tourism that would be so much of a draw so regionally than gastronomy. I mean, I personally travel mostly just to eat at restaurants, and I think that aside from restaurants to travel, of course, you have a lot of landmarks and tourist attractions, but really what keeps people coming back, I think, is restaurants.
Right, because this is a really, I think gastronomy is one of the most accessible forms of communicating culture. It's something that that everyone can appreciate, and certainly you don't need like language skills to appreciate this, and you don't need a lot of background to appreciate it. It's very immediate and intimate, has a lasting impact as well.
Are there anything do you think that the Japanese government can do or local governments can do to help the gastronomy scene, the restaurants, the producers? Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I think because I'm living in rural area, countryside, it's not in Tokyo. So yes, it's government. I really need kind of government helps to developing, like Marinda said, to like finest good producing and the educated local and also these farmers as well. But also same time, we do sometimes ourselves doing some like join it together to small event our kitchen, because it's easier, because it's compared to like think about tourists, also some restaurants and producer, it's kind of a different office in the government. If it's connect together to, we ask the office to respond together things, it takes a long time, like 2-3 months to happen to the event. So we like to do like a happen to immediately or to seasonally. So we do by ourselves, but it's possible to help the government, even like a local government help us. It's really appreciate to that, but it takes, the timing as well.
In addition to that, Japanese government also recognize that gastronomy or luxury tourism is the one key issue to reactivate the Japanese economy. That's why the Japanese Ministry of Food Agriculture or Japanese Agency of National Tourism make a budget to promote such kind of gas tourism or luxury tourism. But problem is that there is no enough curator or producer of that who recognize or who understand what is a gastronomy tourism is a problem.
I agree with you very much because as a journalist, especially a foreign journalist based in Japan, I get invited to press trips in Japan and I get asked to give my opinions to a lot of local governments regarding the experience and things that I think could be done better. And I see a lot of areas that need improvement. Gosh, where to even begin? But like just from the journalist perspective, I feel like there is an over-reliance or there is a belief. There's a belief among a lot of local governments that just promotion or marketing is enough. But what they fail to recognize is that there are a lot of structural things that really need to be addressed. And one of those issues would be like accommodation, accessibility, things that we had discussed earlier. But for example, everyone says they would like to target affluent tourists, and a lot of times from European or Western countries like the US. But when you go to a lot of these places, there is a lack of, for example, accommodation that would be at an international standard. So I feel like it would be very much in their interest to make some investments and like strategize on ways that they can offer like a different range of accommodations. But then when journalists like me try to convey that opinion, it's often met with a lot of resistance. And even things like smaller sort of more conservative measures could be taken. For example, if you have really nice ryokan and like Japanese inns in a region, like for them to be more flexible, to not lock people into like all the meals, for example. But it's really hard for those businesses to take on that kind of feedback. And even things like having coffee at some of these hotels has been like a big issue that I've related, but it's not always heard.
Right. Yeah, accommodation is a big issue in many parts of Japan where I travel to, and there are nowadays a great number of amazing restaurants in the in rural areas around Japan. Satoyama Jojo is definitely one. And Satoyama Jojo is a restaurant with rooms or auberge in French. So there's accommodation, of course. But in many areas in Japan, there are great restaurants, but accommodation is severely lacking. It's a big problem. Even in big cities like, well, a major tourist attraction like Kanazawa, there's not a single luxury hotel, which is amazing for some reasons. That's at least how I feel.
One more thing I just wanted to add is that it would be like, to the point of Kuokino-san's earlier statement about how a lot of places have been working together just on their own to collaborate. I think that bringing, having a wider vision in terms of the government entities and different businesses getting together, strategizing on how they can really build a community of businesses that can support not just tourism, but like have a lot of offerings for local people to enjoy. This is something that I think would be really important going forward, because when you have just one place, like one really great restaurant, and then people go there for that restaurant, then only that restaurant really benefits. And then for the guests, they don't really find a lot of other things to do. So they're not going to stick around. I think trying to figure out ways to create a cluster of businesses that can support this industry is very important.
Yeah, I think it's like it's kind of like a mountain, a pyramid. I we think about this because it's kind of like a top restaurant, like I say, or to all the things coming to the top restaurant, top read first, and going down to the kind of the down bottom. So I think for us, we call that as no secret. So we're sharing everything, like what we learn from like kind of those things, to sharing for the local people to kind of educate, and the food level is going up. So I think this is quite important. Not only the one big like a top restaurant to growing up, but it's also to local to educate and be together food and sharing support. Yeah, right.
Something definitely a good point. Thanks very much. Well, I'd like to now talk about the world post COVID, which is the main theme of this event. So many of us actually have traveled around the world after the COVID has kind of settled down. And we noticed that the tourism and F&B sectors are booming in the US and Europe. And there's a to the point where, the infrastructure is strained. You have, airplane delays and cancellations. And, I have suffered a lot already myself. And restaurants are operating at shorter hours. Even if there's a lot of demand, they can't operate as they used to because they just don't have enough people. Labor shortage is serious, not just in F&B, but especially in F&B, where people got traumatized by being in the industry. Like their mom and dad would say, "Oh, don't go into F&B. It's dangerous. Get a stable job." So that's happening everywhere in the world. But Japan is about to open the border fully starting tomorrow. So there'll be an influx of tourists like we used to have until 2019 or even more in coming month or at least next year. And what are the lessons that Japan can learn from the experience that these countries like Europe and the US are already experiencing?
I think from a restaurant standpoint, I would say, I just spent the last month in Europe. I think that a lot of these restaurants and businesses are pivoted in terms of labor for sure, because there is no labor to operate 7 days a week, lunch and dinner anymore. That just doesn't exist. And I think that was a problem even before COVID, that I hate to say this, there were too many restaurants and there was too many restaurants and not enough staff. Now, unfortunately, a lot of those places have closed. However, a lot of people have also left the industry, like you said, Takafumi. But I think that when I was in Europe, I think that a lot of the restaurants were operating on a 4-day work week. Not as many people want to work those hours that were demanded of you in F&B before. Maybe 15, 20 years ago, we were working 5, 6 days a week, 18 hours a day. And unfortunately, people don't want to do that anymore, myself included, to be honest. I'm getting a little older. So to find the staff to staff a full restaurant, throughout the whole week is just impossible. And I think the economics of the business don't work if you do, due to rise in labor costs. So I think that, for example, at the Four Seasons, we operate 5 days a week, 4 days only for lunch. Now, that's not necessarily due to the labor shortage. It's more people want to fit their work around their lives rather than the other way around, like when I first joined the industry, for sure.
Yep. Belinda, what do you think based on your recent travels?
Well, as I was saying earlier, Japan never experienced the same kind of hard lockdowns that a lot of cities or countries around the world did. And in one way, that was really great, from the consumer's perspective, especially because we were living in a kind of bubble. And it was great that the government was able to offer some subsidies for the for the F&B industry for the first couple of years. But this year, I've heard from a lot of restaurants that they are suffering immensely because those subsidies have run out, and they're still dealing with the consequences of the pandemic, with fewer customers and shortened hours, and also staffing issues. So like a whole plethora of issues. But in countries where we've seen a lot of really hard lockdowns, we have seen a lot of bankruptcies, which of course is really unfortunate. But when I was in Bangkok, for example, I noticed that a lot of those businesses that disappeared have really reinvented themselves, and they have started new businesses and different models of businesses, hybrid businesses. So in that respect, it has been a real opportunity for a lot of them to try something new, something challenging, and it's exciting. It's exciting.
Right. So Daniel, do you already see a pickup in your international guests, international visitors, or not yet?
Oh, absolutely. I think as soon as the announcement was made, almost every table in the restaurant's booked till the end of the year, as is most of the hotel rooms. So I think that, and of course we have an overwhelming majority of internationals from that, mostly within the Asia region, a couple from America, but mostly in the Asia region. So yeah, I mean, totally. I think there's a thirst and a desire to come visit Japan as soon as possible. You know, especially I spent 5 years in Hong Kong, so it feels like everyone from Hong Kong is now coming to Japan,
Right.
which is a good thing for sure. So yeah, absolutely. I think it was almost as if someone turned a switch overnight, and people not necessarily forgot about the pandemic, but they're so tired and they want to travel that it's almost, let's just get back to business.
Right.
I mean, I've been getting messages every single day from people who have already booked their tickets to Japan and are coming starting tomorrow.
Right. Same here. You know, I get messages, almost every day asking for Sushi Saito reservation in 2 weeks' time, which would not happen, right? So, so how about Keiko? Are you getting any inquiries from abroad?
Yeah, we also had lots of equipment from the overseas already for Asia and also other Europe country. But it's again, like Daniel said, especially in Tokyo, if you say Tokyo, so hard to get the people to the work. A rural side, countryside, as a chef, to the good quality chef, it's so hard to get. So it's kind of for me, it's understand because it's sometimes so hard to live in countryside as a chef because I'm not from the Niigata area. I'm from Saitama. It's first 2-3 years so hard to living there, to cooking there. But I think as a chef side, it's really important to living there, to really live there, and also to be as a local, to be to connect to the local people. But it's the same time it's so hard to the young chef to request the kind of like a situation. They just want to run to the 2-3 years and they go to the other restaurant. So then I think about maybe I can ask some like auntie, oji-chan, oba-chan in the local area to kind of part of this working with us, which is also good because they have time and so but it's kind of labor shortage quite very serious. And
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
tapping on the resources of
Yeah.
local resources of the elderly population have, I guess, already retired.
Can I ask also if you do any sort of mentorship at Satoyama Jujo for young people who can come and see what you do, to maybe even give classes to young people? I'm not sure what, but
it's a good question. I don't depend, but I think it's those days some young chef to interesting not only working. There's a quite optional for them to not only working in the top high-end chef restaurant in Tokyo, but they also looking for the other countryside to work in. But it's same time again, it's not easy things to work in the countryside. I think it's the same like working in Tokyo, like working hours things as well. I work quite like
Yeah.
6 days a week.
I think that, yeah, for sure. I think the future will be more collaboration, and especially where we are, we've started to collaborate with culinary schools, for example, and try to plant the seed in inception where we can have the kids come from such a younger age to join us, and maybe they'll spend a little more time with us. But yeah, of course, it's a challenge because the younger generation don't necessarily follow one path, like you say. They want to stay for a year, 2 years, and then jump to the next one. Whereas I think it was a little different before, but there's more choices than ever. That's the problem.
Do you so Kawakino-san, Keiko, you have already also visited Austria recently, and how do you see the culinary scene there? I guess it's booming and everybody's kind of eating out, etc.
Yeah, it's quite surprising me because there were no one wear the mask, and also there's a big event. It's a huge event I attend, and also I cook in there. I think they kind of already back to this culinary industry is quite now. It's busy now, and yeah, it's back to normal already.
yeah, I was just in Spain, in Madrid a couple weeks ago, and again, same thing, no masks, and people were definitely going out, places were fully booked. There's like we don't really feel the same sort of pandemic feeling that we still have a little bit here in Tokyo.
Right. So touching upon the labor shortage, do you think that this is going to get worse in Japan as the business picks up? What do you think?
I don't think it's going to get worse. I don't know how it can get worse, to be honest. I think
It's
that
already bad.
yeah,
you mean?
it's quite dire. Please don't get worse. No, I think that, I would talk from where I'm from. There's a huge interest in younger cooks from abroad. I get many resumes every day from abroad, and only now have we been able to get them in to the country. Well, maybe 6 months ago, but that is very promising, I think, because if I'm getting quite a few resumes, I'm sure a lot of the higher end Japanese restaurants also are too. So I hope that there is opportunity for the chefs to hire from abroad to bolster their teams. Yeah, I think it's only a good thing.
Have you gotten any kind of inquiries in that same direction, like from young chefs overseas who want to
Yeah.
come and do an
That
apprenticeship?
we really like to do that, but it's same time, it's sometimes so hard to, it's because our kind of typical Japanese kind of cuisine restaurant, it's okay to just come to our restaurant to intern for 6 months. We had sometimes before the coronavirus happened, but yeah, but we like to do that. We try to get kind of intern from the overseas and employer staff. If the local government help us or something help us, they're really good.
I think too that, for example, like what you just did when you were in Austria participating in was it Gomio? In a really big culinary event overseas helps to raise the visibility of restaurants outside of major cities like Tokyo and Kyoto. And I think this is something that a lot of Japanese chefs should be encouraged to do more. I think that up until now, a lot of Japanese chefs have been hesitant to participate in these kind of global conferences. And maybe that's something that the government could actually help with a little bit in terms of giving some subsidies for travel or assistance in some way. But going back to what we were talking about gastro diplomacy earlier, another country that had a very aggressive gastro diplomacy program was Korea. And one of their strategy was very different, but also very interesting in that they provided scholarships for young chefs to go study at culinary school overseas. And that not only raised the level of techniques, especially in Western cuisine or non-Korean cuisine, but it also helped them network and see how businesses are run in a different place. And I think that might be something that's interesting for the Japanese government to pursue as well.
But do you think that from what I see about the young Japanese cooks, they all want to learn French cuisine and then go to France for a couple of years and come back to Japan and execute almost what they were learning over there, rather than going somewhere else and being forced, like you say, to be a little more creative?
Yeah, but for example, with Korea, the chefs couldn't choose where to go.
Okay.
They were sent. So for example, to the US would be like what was one of the largest places where these students were
Yeah.
dispatched. So I mean, it's true that a lot of this goes back to what I was saying about creative cuisine in Japan. It almost always seems to be focused on a Western sort of base foundation. People want to go to France, they want to go to Italy and study, but there are so many other options. And then again, looking at the cuisine of Japan, I know it's very intimidating because of like what you were saying, Takafumi-san, about how the idea is to perfect one technique, one kind of thing. Like the idea is that there is a right and there's a wrong. So if there's some way to loosen that idea, then a lot of people might be more interested in trying to pursue more creative Japanese cuisine.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's quite hard, especially if you think of talking about Japanese cuisine, kaiseki, or it's kind of I don't want to say that, but it's kind of some kitchen so close. They don't want to share anything to sometimes. So I think if it's for growing up or the level of the food, it's sometimes we need a sharing and each other.
Absolutely. And that is what helped Spain really propel its food culture forward. And then going on that model, that's what Peruvians did. They, a lot of not a lot, most of the Peruvian chefs got together and collaborated, sharing everything and also promoting each other. And that's something that I would love to see happen more in Japan too, where chefs support each other, recommend for different kinds of opportunities. And, I think that that would really make things a lot more exciting.
We experienced that kind of thing firsthand in Hong Kong, for example, because there's such a huge culinary identity in Hong Kong and China, but the majority of kids who were learning to cook, they didn't want to go to work in Chinese restaurants because they felt that they weren't going to learn anything because no one wanted to pass anything down. So they would come to work in Western or French restaurants because their learning and their career progression would actually be a lot quicker, which is sad because I'm not saying that there's not as many great Chinese restaurants opening, but compared to Western restaurants in Hong Kong, it's for sure having a negative impact.
Interesting. Thank you. Well, I'd like to, because, we have Keiko and Keisuke here, I would like to focus on how that influx of expected coming back of international tourists would impact rural areas. And I think this is very important because if tourists just come to places like Tokyo, Kyoto, and Kanazawa, there'll be an issue of over-tourism. There'll be negative impact as well, because places like Kanazawa, just there last week, it's already flooded with tourists, and it's so difficult to get a seat at Shinkansen at peak times. So it makes sense for everyone to kind of, to make sure that people spread out and explore other parts of Japan that are equally as attractive. What are the opportunities that you think exist for rural areas in Japan in terms of gastronomy? Keiko, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a tourist is very important for us. We kind of depend on that, but at the same time, it sometimes happen negative impact to the local people, to the tourists. That's true. So I think it's important thing is relationship and respect each other. So yeah, that's a point to see that kind of culinary, especially the rural area, with some local people sometimes doesn't want to get foreigners sometimes because they don't understand what they're saying. So language barrier is very hard for this local area, rural area. So yeah, it's a relationship, respect each other. It's kind of like a basic stuff that is quite important. Yeah.
Keisuke, what are are there anything that the government is doing to promote tourism in Yoichi? Well, Yoichi is, of course, as you guys know, famous for whiskey, and also it's becoming famous for wine as well.
Yes. Yeah, from the point of view of Japanese GDP, 40% is earned in the Tokyo area and Aichi, Chukyo, and Kansai area. It means the rest of the 60% of Japanese GDP earned in the local area, right? That's from this point of view, local areas tourism and gastronomy tourism and tourism industry is very important for the reactivate Japanese economy. In addition to that, I, as a leader of local government, aiming to promote a local, tourism is to enforce and increase the local Japanese salary itself. In this point of view, Japanese local restaurants and gastronomy tourism is very important. In addition to that, in Yoichi, there is very famous area for the whiskey distillery and winery, and this is very important for from the point of view to avoid you said Hamada-san said over tourism also.
Well, so do you expect people to come to Yoichi for I guess in places like Napa, wine tourism is pretty big, right? People come and they go visit wineries. Is that something that's already happening in Yoichi, or that could happen in the future?
Yes, gradually is happening. Most of the tourists to Yoichi is focusing in the whiskey distillery, but these days now in this season is a cropping, and they're picking the grapes. So many tourists, not so tourists, wine lovers are coming to Yoichi right now. And in this point of view, we are focusing on so-called tribe marketing. We define the foodie and wine lover and so-called fired people it's as a tribe, and we are focusing the PR to that kind of people. It's a tribe.
I just wonder if there's an infrastructure for wine tourism that exists in Yoichi, because I know that a lot of other, like there are several, for example, sake breweries that are not open to the public, and you have to really make a lot of efforts to go visit them. And is it like that in Yoichi or
No.
no?
It's a good point. Infrastructure, including transport, is not so not so. I mean, we weak because we have to. If you go to Yoichi, we access to from Sapporo to by train or bus. But a problem of Japanese this transportation is we cannot use Uber, right? Sharing car share or sharing transportation is if we reactivate the local economy, we have to change this kind of regulation also. I think so.
So your idea, what you're saying is that Yoichi would benefit from deregulating
Mhm.
and having an Uber-like system.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. And I guess with the Yoichi, the problem is that in the near future, the local train system will be
Mhm.
abolished, right?
Yeah.
Because arrival of the Shinkansen.
Yeah. And now problem of transportation is by 2030, Hokkaido Shinkansen will go to the Sapporo from Hakodate. By 2030, local train will be stopped. This is a big problem. That's why we should deregulate that kind of, for example, that we can use the Uber or something.
From a global perspective, Daniel and Melinda, what are the attractiveness of the Japanese rural areas, the countryside, vis-a-vis, other destinations? Because, I like to, I always talk about global perspective because, tourists, they have the choice. They can have the choice of visiting countryside in Japan or in Korea or in China or maybe in Europe. So they're always comparing. So I think it's important to have that perspective. What do you think? Are they attractive enough that tourists would come, or they're not that attractive?
I certainly think they're attractive enough, and there's certainly enough variety. Of course, most regions you go to in Japan are something different from any other region that can be found there. But like Ketsuki said, the infrastructure sometimes we had a lot of fun trying to get up to the mountains in Toyama earlier on this year.
It almost didn't happen.
Yeah. Luckily somebody could drive because I can't, but there's definitely enough attraction. And to be honest, it shows that there is enough attraction, the fact that we actually did it, and I would do it again. So of course, there's no end to it for sure.
Yeah, I think that the rural areas in Japan certainly are attractive. I mean, right now we see like already people talking about wanting to go to Kyushu, for example, because you have within this region so much diversity, and you have like wonderful natural landscapes, you have like warm, welcoming people, and you have amazing food at really amazing prices. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity, but it's just a matter of finding ways to actually like allow people to access these places with greater ease, and also meeting their needs. So that's one of the problems that I often encounter, is that there's a mismatch of expectations between what the prefecture or the region wants to show and what the tourists or the visitors rather, and not only international, but particularly international visitors want to experience.
Right. It's a very good point. Even within Japan, I feel that so when I go visit rural areas, there's a big gap between what they want to show me and what I want to see. That's a big issue, I think. In terms of food as well, some rural areas would say they are the food capital of Japan, and they have this and this product, which is number one. But that's almost always quoted in the sense of quantity. So quantity doesn't mean quality, So for from the gastronomic standpoint, quantity doesn't really mean anything. It's more about quality, and that's the direction that that local governments should be pursuing, given that, there will be, of course, with the agriculture, the lowering of the tariffs and etc. That's my personal view.
Totally agree.
Well, I guess we're running out of time. We're just barely scratching the surface of this, interesting topic. But we're now turning into Q&A sessions. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. I think we'll be taking questions offline as well, online as well.
Hello, my name's Alex Bradshaw. I run a travel consultancy called Gotoku. I just want to ask a question to Melinda.
Hey, Alex.
Hello there.
Nice to-
Hi.
nice to
Nice to finally meet you in person. So basically, craftspeople often say that they have to educate the consumer to bring up the level of the consumer to fully appreciate that the crafts that they produce. Do you think that the education of inbound travelers to Japan regarding Japanese food is something that needs to be worked on harder? And also, how do regions differentiate themselves amongst the high quality of food that's available in the major cities?
Okay, so that's actually a lot of questions. So first of all, I think that there is the level of knowledge of overseas travelers with regard to Japanese food is certainly rising. Japanese food has been very trendy for the past 10 years, and especially at the highest level. So, I mean, Daniel can probably speak to this as well. Almost every chef overseas is interested in Japanese cuisine. So I think that is certainly something that like we see the level rising. In terms of other crafts as well, people are interested, like right now, for example, kintsugi is so popular. So there's a greater awareness of traditional crafts, not a deep awareness. But I think that you'll find among younger Japanese people that that's also true. In terms of differentiating from region to region, I mean, that is a really difficult question. Every region has really great products, but I think that it's up to the local people with perhaps like, with wonderful chefs like Keiko-san, to be putting their input, and also with very enlightened government entities, trying to promote some of those crafts and products and raise them to an international standard.
I think it's important for the governments to have a perspective on objectively on what their really strengths are and weaknesses are, because one government would say, oh, our fish is the best in Japan, but then if that if you have traveled to neighboring prefectures and have tasted better fish, you think that's just what they think, and it's a problem with the governments or producers. They don't really visit their competitors. They don't really identify their competitors and do a comparative analysis, which is something that any business would do, profit-making business would do. But there's something that's lacking amongst governments and also producers who are focused on producing the best quality, whatever that they're making.
But do you
I
think
absolutely agree with you.
that's a pride thing more than anything else, right? Every prefecture is so proud of what they're doing. I guess they feel that they don't have to.
Yeah,
don't
but
want
I
to.
mean, I feel like they have to be more open-minded. And another thing that I find lacking is the deep research into the market they want to connect with. So there is a lack of understanding of, again, like the needs and the desires of the people that they're actually trying to attract. So yeah, there's a lot of study that can be done amongst the producers and purveyors.
Definitely agree with you. I mean, it's not the movie Field of Dreams, but it's like if you build it, they will come. If you make good things, good products, people will buy it. Is the mentality that most of the Japanese producers have, but that's not necessarily the case. I mean, it has to be they have to have a market perspective, which is sometimes lacking.
Yes, I have a question regarding the point that you raised before about the innovation. So in overseas, Japanese chefs is also trying their best to do fusion with the cuisine. And then tourists come to Japan. I think most of them take their effort to come to Japan because they want to experience what is truly traditional Japan. So is that like that creativity will affect that kind of experience or expectation with the tourists or not?
Yeah, I think it's very important we respect traditional and local culture stuff, but at the same time, we innovate as a chef. We not just repeat it same thing again and again. We, as a chef, we innovate, create new things. But also same time, it's so hard, but it's kind of, we need to back to our roots for the local. So, but it takes time again. Living locally is very important, I think, to really understand about the local culture and community. But I think it's so hard to find kind of chef in the countryside to share this kind of knowledge. But I think we should, because those days we lost the kind of knowledge about the traditional things. Each region has a traditional cuisine and a lot, even like a small village has it, but it's, of course, around the program as well, but we have to kind of protect the kind of stuff to share this knowledge, but have to run out as a chef to understanding this culture as well. Yeah.
You know, tying into that, Takafuma, do you think that a lot of the younger generation who have gone abroad to learn how to cook and stay there, they feel creatively more free, and that's why perhaps they're not coming back to Japan, I guess?
Well, that's one factor. I mean, there are many aspiring chefs in Japan who go abroad and stage or study at top restaurants in the world. Many of them historically have come back to Japan, but recently, increasingly, some of them are deciding to stay in the countries that they learn their skills, or to work in other countries. So a Japanese chef who honed his skills in France could open a restaurant in Singapore, for example. That's happening more and more these days. And that's, as Daniel said, that's partly due to the fact that it's they feel more, they feel like they have more freedom in expressing their creativity. That's definitely one thing. And there's also a business factor as well. As Daniel also mentioned earlier, the Japanese restaurant scene is very, very competitive. I mean, if you are, especially high end, if you are business minded, you wouldn't want to enter it, as a business person. It's such a red ocean. So that's definitely another reason, I think. And to your point,
Oh, sorry, just to go back to your question, I don't think that there's any danger of these traditional restaurants really disappearing completely. So I feel like there will always be some people to lead the way in that direction. But one thing that is interesting is if younger Japanese chefs maybe can go to local places and learn about the traditions of those regions, and then learn how to incorporate some of those traditions into their cuisine. And then that might spark more interest, even among local people to keep those traditions alive, so that they don't become like a museum piece. It's like more of an evolution, or like, a living, like a living tradition.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Creativity doesn't necessarily mean adding, foreign elements to something that's traditional, or using new techniques that haven't existed before. It could mean, digging into your own roots, traditions, and rediscovering something that used to exist and not anymore, for example. And that's also creativity. Many of the top restaurants in Europe are doing that. There used to be a time where, and there are still restaurants like that, but there was a trend of introducing foreign exotic elements to your cooking. That was especially popular in places like Italy in the 90s. Which I didn't find attractive at all. Coming from Japan, I didn't want to see sashimi-like dish in Italy at a lesser quality. That used to happen, but not really anymore. I mean, many of the top chefs, are focusing on their own traditions. For example, they would go back to recipes of the Roman times and resuscitate the recipes and make them relevant to the palate of the modern consumers, which is definitely something that's a direction that Japanese chefs can take. And this is overlapping what you guys have already said, but rediscovering culinary traditions of various regions is definitely a way to go, in my opinion.
Hi, I'm Sachin Chaudhary from Tokyo. I'd like to know, like, how are the things happening in a vegan tourism or like kind of whiskey tourism and these kind of things? Because in Japan, like when we go to the countryside, normally it's very difficult to find like vegan restaurants and like the tourism, like now it's going to be a boom industry. So like when we want to go to like countryside and like lots of tourism, like even from India, like 40% of the population is vegetarian. So they normally go to US, Europe, and other places because they get normally vegan food. So like, how are the things like propping up in like Japan for like vegan or like plant-based or like these kind of things? Because still like myself in Japan, I don't get good soya meat in Japan. So yeah,
Right,
so
right.
like how's that happening like in
Yeah.
Japan?
Thanks for asking a question that's very relevant for Chef Keiko. Like,
Yeah, that's true. I was being a vegan for 7 years, and as back to Japan, it's so hard to find a good quality of vegan vegetarian restaurant. Talking about our restaurant, we serve for the vegan and vegetarian option, but that's so hard to because I think it's also is as a Japanese, we don't have much vegan vegetarian choice. I mean, as a Japanese, we are quite eat everything. I mean, eat meat. So we have to first of all it's understand it's to what is vegetarian, what is vegan is, because it depends on your nationality or region, also different to vegetarian and vegan. So I think educate quite important to the, especially rural local area to this, what is the other country to want to, or what's the custom is there. So yeah, it takes time, but that's true. We need it, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
you were just in Austria to collaborate with was a vegan restaurant, right?
Oh no, it's
Or the plant-based.
Tian. Yeah, it's not that not collaborate, but it's kind of the Tian. Yeah, so it's interesting because there's quite use lots of different technique and to use the fermentation stuff. Yeah, I think it's kind of we should do kind of collaboration to other overseas chefs to more encourage each other to share their knowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
The sharing of the knowledge is important. And again, this goes back a little bit to what I was saying before about how there needs to be a better understanding of the markets that you're trying to reach. And of course, that takes a lot of effort, and that's not something people always say they don't have time, but it's so important. Yeah, when you see this mismatch, it's painful, actually.
This is my opinion and also the question that somebody said that the Uber is useful for the kind of improved access to the the restaurants in rural areas especially. So I think the cab industry is terrible, especially as rural areas. Almost nobody, but the still cab industry is there. So this is a kind of problem. But they please, they show us, the how it is good if we apply the Uber industry into the rural, and then try to deregulate, please.
So the ride sharing.
Sharing, yes.
Yes. How can that be done?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I was working at the rural government, right? And I'm doing a project or ride sharing also. If you live in Tokyo, you can easily find a taxi or everywhere, but in the local area, there is a very hard to find out a taxi. That's why this is a point. The same discussion is totally how to say nonsense from Tokyo and the rural area. And that's why Japanese government should recognize the difference between Tokyo and rural. This is the first step to deregulate this regulation. This to how to say to
what is the pottery style of pottery you're talking about, like the breaking one? So
Thank you. I guess the time is up. No time for any other questions? No? Okay. Okay. Thanks very much for participating in our session. I hope this was of interest to you. And thank you all the panelists for participating and contributing your inputs. Okay. Thanks very much.